Hello, ladies and gents. We're going to hop on to part number 2 of daily number 439, where we learn to be a better gamer. And today it's PvP with HuK. What we essentially did was identify that there was no sort of early aggression coming. So we were able to get away with just a single stalker in the early game. Let's see, where's that hero? Here he is. No, here's the hero stalker who's even taken some damage. He has one kill that very critically was a probe that was swinging its way in to try to kill us with a proxy pylon. Kill that off. We did a warping round with zealots right at the start to try to kill off the pylons, which we did successfully. Now we're on to the ever important phase 2, where we're going to get our Dark Templar out. We go for a double DT and a zealot to move up. This is generally good form to build 2 DTs. Just because we can almost always morph an Archon if things go awry. Morphing 3 DTs I don't think serves any better purpose that 2 DTs would. So we end up doing this little push. We end up killing off the sentries. So far we haven't had a complete and total foible. But as we're pushing up, we end up losing quite a bit more units. So it's very easy at this point to go to this unit station and to go, oh man, HuK is in a terrible spot because the DT rush didn't work. But this build order that HuK does has a ton of sort of secondary benefits. I don't think that this sort of zealot sentry stuff is essential to the build in some way. But it does help us do a little bit of a contain, while most importantly we get up a nexus. Notice very importantly that we are expanding before our opponent. It's really hard for Oz to move out for a while now. If he's gone robo, at the very least he needs to build 2 observers before he comes out. Because if he attacks, he needs 1 observer there with the army and 1 observer back home in case you just counter with a DT. Very easy to do. So right now our Protoss opponent is kind of pinned. So this gives HuK a big amount of time where he knows he's not going to be attacked. What does HuK do with this time? Most notably the expansion, but also quite importantly, he's morphing in 2 additional gateways. And also note that HuK has a DT planted here. So remember that theoretical we have to build a second observer. HuK doesn't mess around with it. He's not just assuming his opponent will build a second observer and have to roll with it. He is actually going to punish him if if the push moves out. Keeping the stalkers at the front, but yeah, getting these extra 2 gateways up. And we know our opponent is doing some sort of robo-focused play. Zealots with charge are going to be so good against a small robo-focused army that has a lot of immortals. So literally in this entire period, HuK has built almost no units. He's warped in some DTs, yeah, maybe an extra stalker, maybe an extra zealot or so, but other than that, it's buildings, tech, probes, en masse, and even building some extra probes. So our proxy ends up getting killed, no big deal. We have a second backup proxy, and I would honestly say HuK is one of the best in the world at playing these proxy pylons. And you'll feel this when you play, that you're just like, man, I really don't have that proxy up early enough. I have to focus on that. A couple of little things that we also see HuK do that I think are pretty important to the build. 2 in these geysers. 2 and 2. We are actually relying wholly on zealots and charge. We might not have the hugest probe lead, but really our only ticket to staying alive is going to be to get a lot of zealots up. So we want some gas, but not all the gas. We really need the gas for those DTs. So at this point in time, we're continuing to try to get dominance over the center of the map position. Our stalkers still occupy the task of trying to pick off these pylons about the map. And why do we have such a reign over map control? Thanks to this Dark Templar. Our opponent really cannot move around except in these tight packs where he has an observer. So he needs those 2 observers there. This is very helpful. Around the 10-minute mark, I like the fact that HuK just gets a robotics facility. This will be for the defensive observer. But what I want to do is focus more on this act that we're going to see HuK do, where these 2 DTs morph in, and boom. This little composition is a very nasty mixture that can break a ton of defensive Protosses. They'll focus on force field and immortals to deal with almost everything, and naturally this Archon breaks down all the force fields. We sadly lost quite a lot at the start of the game, so it may or may not work, but this is where I want to play a little bit of the what-if game. What if our opponent tries to go for colossi too quickly? Colossi murder zealots. They kill zealots so fast to the point where zealots almost seem obsolete when you get to the late game. So, this attack, if our opponent tries to get colossi too fast, we can actually kill him with this little push. As we see in Oz's main base, he's going for a largely gateway mixture, so he's going to end up being okay. But if he didn't and went for really, really fast colossus, we can actually go in and murder him, or at the very, very least, kill off this expansion. This push is just as important to the build as that Dark Templar play. HuK wins a lot of games with this push. Does pull back because this pylon is causing a little bit of an emergency. Now, what we actually end up seeing is that there's a DT being warped in right now, but HuK ends up killing it just in time. Even if he didn't, he has the Observer coming up as well. So that gets killed off. There's the cancel on it. In almost all other circumstances, HuK will have a nice excuse me, timing where he can crush in here and take this out. Okay, what did we say with the DT? If we go for DT, sorry, he's probably going to be focusing on a largely robo-based play. Okay, well, if we have this big Zealot Archon push, he's going to have a good amount of gateway units to stay alive. Notice how the first attack narrowed it down a lot, and the second attack narrows it down a lot. Players who build too many sentries and rely too much on force fields, we just cross them out. Players who build too many immortals, assuming you're going to go blink, cross them out. We just crush through it with speed zealots and no force fields. Players who are building a good amount of gateway units, probably going to stay alive. Players who go for too fast colossus don't really have enough ground units. We can clean that off pretty nicely. This attack is essential. But here's the question that many will struggle with. This, I think, almost everyone can get to logically, but there's a big danger with having too many zealots at this phase in the game, which is that when our Protoss opponent does eventually begin to build up and begin to start making a lot of colossi, these zealots are going to die really, really quickly. So let's see how HuK ends up answering that. He's put 3 guys back in each geyser now. Excellent. Going ahead, getting the gas, getting the forge. I want you to be aware. Actually, I'll even pull back to... Let's go back, to 11 minutes. I like this. Let's look at the production for HuK. Right as he builds this robo facility. We see 2 zealots morphing in. We see the Archon morphing in. The Observer. We have some more zealots. This is during that push phase. And as we start to get the robo tech up, again, keep your eyes up here. This is an important phase to the build where we're actually going to see HuK not really make gateway units. There's the Colossus. There's the +1. Oh, 2 zealots. Are we going to be building a 3rd Colossus? Yep. Any gateway units? Oh, okay, we did around there. Yeah, okay, now we're building some Colossi. Almost all the focus is on the Colossus, the range, the forge, etc. And now we're in this sort of awkward position we may feel where he's going for all this blink tech, but we don't need to worry about him force fielding our ramp and abusing us with blink because we have this Archon, because we have the Colossi. We've finally lost a little bit of map control as he has blink and observers, and enough to defend his front. But this is the push I find very clever from HuK. These zealots are going to be very useless after a long period of time. They are easily going to get murdered if the opponent gets 5 to 8 colossi. Even 4 might make this a little bit tricky. So HuK pushes the instant he gets 3 colossi. The instant that he thinks he's going to be done with range, we see it just now finishing up, that is when he pushes. As instantly as possible. Why is that? Because we're going to be almost certainly up against a somewhat low colossus count. We see that Oz has 2. He's actually going to have 3 in a second. If we look at Oz's army with 3 colossus, we have some immortals, which are largely useless against our zealots. We have a lot of blink stalkers, which are just good units. We have his zealots, which are actually probably going to be the biggest problem for us. In addition to the colossus, of course. But notice that we have 34 zealots. This huge swell of zealots that I'm actually going to have their health selected throughout this battle are going to be the real tide turners for us in this engagement. These would be virtually useless if there were too many colossus. I can't emphasize that enough. So see how Oz is actually target firing these zealots? Maximum damage on the zealots for Oz. Like, he's really nailing it. He's doing good. You see some blink aheads, more zealots streaming in, and colossi are pretty terrible against the zealots once the zealots get underneath them. And there's some nice blink unders to try to get under the colossus. It works pretty reasonably well. But our zealots are still continuing to tear forward. Now let's go ahead and look at the unit count again. Now, let me actually look at the unit count 10 seconds prior. Suddenly, we have 18 zealots. He has none. We both lost about 18 zealots. We're actually even in colossus because one of our colossus is back here. And wow, yeah, it looks like his blink stalkers are really the only edge that he has in this fight. But the stalkers have to blink underneath the colossus, which means that our zealots can be dealing damage to those blink stalkers a lot more often. Now, if this were a maxed army fight, and there were just 2 more colossi in there, our zealots would be crushed. This follow-up attack from HuK is absolutely brilliant. An absolutely brilliant attack. I love this attack. And we just continue to stream forward. Our zealots eventually start to evaporate, but we break the front nice and easy. I love that so much. So good! Oh god, I'm still gonna sit here and watch it happen. Oh yes, good game. So, again, to come back to what we were talking about earlier on, we opened up with Dark Templar to help us cross off a huge amount of possibilities. Where if he's going for some sort of ultra-fast blink or ultra-fast Stargate with no robo, we just kill him. Only if he focuses on his robo tech can he actually even hope to stay alive. And if he delays his robo even some, we still do a huge amount of damage. We do have to be wary about some early attacks and that sort of thing, but if we can identify that he's not doing some sort of hyper-aggressive early game, then we're still happy. If he's not doing a hyper-aggressive early game, we can focus on throwing down the Twilight Council immediately and sprinting on to glorious victory. What I want to do now is I want to take a turn and look at a game that is completely different in nature. Same 2 puzzles. Let me see here. It is in round... Great. It's on Entombed Valley. This is a much smaller map. Now, what I'm going to do is just tell you Oz does something quite aggressive. In the previous game, we saw Oz do this weird Zealot before Cybernetics core thing while still getting an awfully fast robo. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, HuK is going to do the same basic idea as last game, but he's going to pull it off in a much different way. So here he is, Gateway, at a pretty normal time. He's going for his Assimilator at a pretty normal time. Builds his Cybernetics core at a pretty normal time, but goes ahead and builds a Zealot in this circumstance. Now, go ahead and look at my awesome logo while I just blow my nose really fast. Cool. This Zealot is another way of saying, hey, it's a much smaller map. I'm much more susceptible to early pressure. I'm going to build an emergency backup Zealot. Obviously, it's nice because we don't spend any gas getting our Zealot, so it's not like it interrupts our DT play too much, but it does delay this gas geyser a little bit, and it's important that we're aware of that. And again, 3 chrono boosts on the probes. So when HuK gets into here, sees a ton of energy on the Nexus. I don't know if you saw that before it came up. I'm actually just going to look at it one more time just to be ultra clear. So we see a Zealot. We see this building something. We see a Chrono here, and look at the energy on that. Doing it again. The biggest signs of aggression are one gate with a lot of Chrono and a Zealot. Or, more notably, one Zealot, one gate, and no second gas. The no second gas is almost always a big sign that he wants to do something crazy and aggressive. Here's where we have to think. It would be wonderful if we were able to do something like instantly Cybernetics Core, and instantly Twilight Council, and then instantly go for a Dark Shrine. But we would die to that early gateway pressure. We would just literally not have enough stuff. So, what to do now? Well, let's go back to why Dark Templar ended up working in the first place. The Dark Templar forced our opponent to be going down a Robotech path, because if he did anything else, he'd be dead. Now, I want you to envision around the 5-minute mark. We've just started. Let's say we opened up with 2 gates, so we want 1 Stalker, and the second gateway finished, and we built 2 at once, so we have 3 Stalkers total coming out. We're around 5 minutes to 5 minutes and 30 seconds, and we have a choice to make of what tech path we go down. That 5-minute to 5-minute and 30-second window where we make our tech choice still exists for Oz in this case, except it just happens later. In other words, if I go for no aggression, just build my 3 Stalkers, and then build a Robo right off the bat, I'm teching quickly, which is good for me if I'm going for Dark Templar quickly. If he's going for a delayed tech, perhaps a Robo or Twilight Council closer to 7 minutes or 6 minutes and 30 seconds, I can get my Dark Templar delayed, just as his tech is delayed. All the logic and all the rules we were using beforehand still stand. They're just shifted back by a little bit. It's kind of like how, it's almost like a Protoss goes on daylight savings time. If he goes for a really aggressive opening, you do exactly what you're doing, you just do it an hour later each day. So remember how we had 3 gateways beforehand? We're still getting 3 gateways, we're just getting them before our Dark Templar tech. So notice how HuK already poking out, trying to spot everything. Doesn't want to get too far out there. Might even plant this Stalker down here. And there we end up seeing the force field go down. There's the double pylon. And I will note that this warp gate research from Oz happens pretty early. Generally 5:35 to 5:45 is when the warp-in happens. This warp-in is going to be happening closer to 5:30. And of course, 5 to 15 seconds is a gigantic, tremendous, epic difference. And we're seeing HuK still not spending that much chrono boost on the warp gate. His warp gate is a full minute behind. That is okay. He's chrono boosting units instead. Just focuses on this pylon. Oh, didn't manage to get that last units of warp-ins in, but this is where you need to have a little bit of better micromanagement than your opponent. And right as we stopped here, what did we lose? We actually didn't lose very much at all. Generally, if your opponent does do some sort of break in early, it'll be a little bit more even. You might not have top 3 control in the world. But at this point in time, it's important to state what is my edge in this game right now. The big edge that we have is probably workers. We probably have more workers. In this case, we don't, because Oz actually just played pretty brilliantly. But almost certainly we are ahead in the gas count. We see that Oz is Oz. Yeah, Oz is a little bit behind in this regard. Wow, damn, this build is like way better from Oz than I anticipated. But almost certainly we're ahead in the gas count. We have a nice gassy Sentry mixture coming up. And even, let me just state, even if we are fairly even in terms of gameplay, this Nexus is pretty gosh darn easy to just throw down and secure after you have defended against an early gateway pressure. And HuK, I think, is doing the smart thing of going a little bit aggressive. And then what does HuK do? He's going to follow it up with a Twilight Council tech. Because again, what are all the possibilities our opponent can be doing? Well, whatever they may be, he can only just start a tech path right now. Either Expand, or Twilight Council, or Robo, or Phoenix. He can only just now really start those. And since he can only just now really start those, the fact that we're just now starting our DT tech ends up being okay. We'll go ahead and take a look at it in part number 3, coming up after this short break. And we're just going to see how HuK finalizes in this rather unusual situation. Here we go!